Just so you know, I already cleared it with Mom and Dad. You barely use this room anyway. You've been gone over a week already. The light in here is incredible. There's a private entrance from the side yard, and it's ground floor, so there are no stairs. We're going to be really comfortable. Those were the first words out of my younger sister Gabby's mouth when I walked into my own home 8 days before I was supposed to. She was standing in the middle of my design studio, the room I had spent 3 years saving to build, the room that held $40,000 worth of professional equipment, and the better part of a decade of work, the room where my name was on the deed and not a single square foot of hers. And she was describing it to her boyfriend like a real estate agent, walking a client through a listing she'd already mentally closed. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the context of the house. I'm 33. I work as an independent interior designer and architectural consultant, which means I've spent the better part of a decade building a client list, a reputation, and a savings account large enough to do something real with. 3 years ago, I did something real. I bought a 2,400 square foot craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Phoenix, and I paid $720,000 for it. Every dollar came from somewhere specific. A commercial hotel lobby project I'd worked nights on for 6 months, a residential client in Paradise whose referrals kept multiplying for 2 years, a vacation I didn't take the spring before, a car I kept driving past the point where anyone else would have replaced it. I knew exactly what I was saving for, and I said no to a lot of things because I knew what yes would feel like at the end. The house is beautiful in the way that craftsman houses tend to be, warm and intentional, with oak floors I refinished myself and built-ins I designed and had fabricated by a local woodworker. The kitchen has countertops I specified after 3 months of deliberation. The living room has floor-to-ceiling windows I had enlarged during a renovation the second year I owned the place. But the part of the house I am most proud of, the part that makes the whole thing make sense to me, is the studio wing. It was a large attached room accessible from inside the main house, but with its own private entrance off the side yard. When I bought the house, it was an unfinished bonus room with exposed electrical, a cracked concrete floor, and the vague ambition of a previous owner who had never gotten around to finishing it. I had it rebuilt from the inside out, floor-to-ceiling shelving for material and fabric samples, lighting calibrated specifically for accurate color rendering, the kind that matters when you're choosing between 2 whites that look identical in a showroom and completely different on a wall, a 12-foot custom drafting table hand-built by a carpenter in Scottsdale named Kurt, and 2 professional-grade monitors on a corner desk setup. I had the concrete floor polished and sealed. I had acoustic paneling installed on the north wall because sound quality matters when you're on a client call trying to concentrate. The studio is where I do the most consequential part of my work. It is also, if I'm being honest, the room I love most in the world. I had been in Portland for 11 days for the Pacific Northwest Design Summit. Panels, workshops, continuing education credits. I needed to renew my license. On day 8, the morning session wrapped 40 minutes early, and there was a seat on an afternoon flight back to Phoenix that nobody had claimed. I booked it without thinking twice. I texted my best friend Monica that I was coming home early. I did not text my sister. There was no reason to. Gabby had a key. I'd given her one 2 years earlier when I spent 10 days in Italy on a client project and needed someone to water my plants and collect the mail. I had intended to ask for it back when I returned. I never did. I hadn't thought about it once in the 2 years since. The Uber from Sky Harbor turned onto my street just after 4 in the afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet. The light was doing that particular warm gold thing Phoenix light does in the fall, the kind that makes the whole city look like a photograph of itself, and the familiar shapes of the houses felt like something I'd been holding in my chest for 8 days and was finally setting down. Then I noticed the gray sedan parked in my driveway. I didn't recognize it. I asked the driver to stop at the curb. I rolled my carry-on up the front walk and stood still for a moment, listening. The main house looked undisturbed from the outside, curtains where I'd left them, lights off. But from the side yard, from the direction of the studio entrance, there were voices. Muffled movement, the distinct, heavy sound of cardboard boxes being set down on a hard floor. I went in through the front door. The main house was quiet and exactly as I'd left it, down to the coffee mug I'd washed and left in the drying rack the morning I'd flown out. But the hallway leading back to the studio had a different feeling, a density in the air, like someone else's presence had been layering into the space for days. The studio door was open. Through it, I could see Gabby and a man I recognized as her boyfriend, Tanner, arranging a portable clothing rack along the wall where my fabric sample shelving had been. The shelving itself had been shoved into the corner at a careless angle. One of my large sample binders had fallen and fanned open across the floor. My drafting table, the piece I'd waited 8 weeks for and treated with the same care I'd give a piece of museum furniture, had been pushed back against the far wall to clear space for a queen-size air mattress, sitting, fully inflated, in the center of the studio floor. On the surface of the drafting table, running diagonally across the section where I do my most detailed work, was a long pale scratch that had not been there when I left. Gabby turned and saw me. She didn't flinch. There was a half-second pause, and then she arranged her face into something between a smile and a brace. The expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times and has decided to stay calm no matter what direction it goes. She told me about the light and the private entrance and how comfortable they were going to be. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I said quietly, "Where is my drafting table supposed to go, Gabby?" "We just moved it back a little. There's still plenty of room." "There's a scratch on it." She glanced at the table with the brief attention of someone who has already decided an objection isn't worth their time. It was probably already there. It wasn't. I knew that table the way you know a piece of furniture you have worked alongside every single day for 3 years. I knew every grain and every variation in the surface, and that scratch had not existed when I left for Portland. Tanner had not said a word. He was standing near the west window with his arms loosely crossed, looking at the floor. I noticed a plastic bin of shoes near the air mattress, a folded sweater sitting on top of my monitor's cable management panel, a phone charger plugged into the outlet I used for my equipment. They had been here for days. This had been a plan for days. "How did you get in?" I asked. Gabby reached into the pocket of her jeans and set a key on the edge of my shelving unit. My key. The plant watering key. The key I had given her for 10 days in 2023 and never thought to ask back. "I still had this from when you went to Italy," she said. "You were going to be gone the rest of the week anyway, and Tanner lost his job last month, and we got behind on rent and had to leave our apartment. I talked to Mom and Dad about it. They said you'd probably be fine with it since you have so much space and—" "Call Mom," I said, "right now, speaker." She hesitated for a moment, then made the call. 2 rings, and my mother's voice came through, already pitched in the warm, measured tone of someone prepared to be the reasonable one in the room. "Gabby, how are?" "Mom," I said, "did you know about this?" A pause. "Brianna, you're home already?" A beat of recalibration. "Did you know Gabby was doing this?" The pause this time was shorter, which told me more than the answer did. "She mentioned that she and Tanner needed somewhere temporarily, and since the studio is really just your workroom, and you were going to be away for the rest of the week anyway, we thought it seemed like a reasonable solution while they figured things out. You thought you could authorize someone to occupy a room in my home while I was out of state, without asking me." "We knew you'd say no," my mother said, and there it was, as clear as anything she'd ever said to me. They knew. They knew I would say no, so they made the decision while I was gone and planned to present it to me as a situation already in progress, already difficult to undo. I said, "Get out, Gabby, both of you. Take your things and leave right now." Gabby's prepared calm cracked at the edges. "You're being completely unreasonable. We have nowhere else to go. If you'd let us stay for a month, 2 months at the most, we'd figure something out, and we'd be completely out of your way during the day." The answer is no. "So you'd throw your own sister on the street before you'd share a room you don't even sleep in?" "It's not a bedroom," I said. "It's my workplace. My professional equipment is in this room, and the answer is still no. Leave." They didn't move. Tanner shifted his weight but stayed where he was. My mother was still talking through the phone, her voice rising into a register I recognized as the beginning of a long explanation about family and sacrifice and keeping perspective. I walked into the hallway and called 911. I heard Gabby's voice change pitch behind me. I heard my mother's voice rise further in the background. I gave the dispatcher my address and said I had 2 individuals inside my home who had entered without my permission, using a key they'd retained without authorization, that I had asked them to leave and they had refused, and that I needed assistance. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. The police arrived in under 15 minutes. 2 officers. They took in the scene with the unhurried competence of people who understand that a situation like this has a correct procedure, and they followed it. The carry-on still in the hallway, the air mattress in the studio, my equipment pushed into corners, someone else's charging cable in my outlet. One officer asked Gabby directly, "Did the homeowner give you permission to stay here?" "She's my sister," Gabby said. "That's not what I asked." The officers explained, calmly and without ambiguity, what Gabby and Tanner apparently still needed to hear. That family relationship does not constitute permission to occupy a property. The homeowner had clearly asked them to leave, and that continued refusal would result in an outcome neither of them would prefer. Gabby loaded the portable clothing rack and as many bags as she could manage in 2 trips. She didn't look at me while she did it. She left a bin of shoes that didn't fit in the car. When she was done, she paused in the doorway. She said, "You're going to regret this." She said it the way you'd state something you'd already confirmed, without heat or urgency, and then she walked out. I stood alone in my studio for a while after the officers left. The light had shifted to early evening by then, low and flat through the west window, and every scuff mark on the floor and every displaced shelf was visible the way things become visible when the light is exactly wrong for concealment. I got out my phone and documented everything. The scratch on the table from 4 angles, the floor where boxes had been dragged, the shelving pushed into the corner, the outlet with someone else's charger still in it, the key sitting on the edge of the shelf where Gabby had set it down. I photographed all of it, methodically, the way my attorney would later tell me I had done exactly right. Then I called Monica. She arrived 40 minutes later with Thai takeout and the controlled energy of someone who has made a decision to be practical and furious simultaneously, which was precisely the combination I needed. While she unpacked containers at the kitchen island, I called my homeowner's insurance company and explained what had happened. Unauthorized entry, unauthorized occupation, damage to a high-value piece of professional equipment. The representative walked me through my policy's provisions carefully. She noted something I hadn't fully considered, that an undisclosed occupant, even for a few days, created a liability exposure in my coverage, and that documenting the unauthorized nature of the entry was important not just for the damage claim but for protecting my policy's integrity going forward. Get professional estimates for the damaged property, not just general contractor quotes, she said. Professional assessments carry more weight when we process the claim. I will, I told her. Monica handed me chopsticks. It's when I hung up and said nothing until I set the phone down. Then, "This isn't over with your family." "I know," I said, "but I know what I'm doing." She nodded. That was enough. The next morning, I called Mr. Yoon, the real estate attorney who had handled my home purchase, and his assistant fit me in that afternoon. I walked him through everything without embellishment. The key, the entry, the occupation, the damage, the police report, and he listened with the focused attention of someone who charges by the hour and doesn't waste any of it on filler responses. "This is considerably more than a family dispute," he said when I finished. Oclite entry, retention of a key without the owner's consent, damage to personal property, and unauthorized occupation of a dwelling. Each of those has legal standing, and in combination they're significant. I also want you to understand that the unauthorized occupation creates an issue with your homeowner's insurance coverage that their attorney will not be eager to have examined too closely. That's leverage. He laid out the path: continue cooperating with the police investigation, file a formal damage claim with my insurer, pursue a civil demand covering the full cost of restoration plus attorney's fees, and seek a no-contact agreement as a non-negotiable condition of any settlement. What about the insurance company going after them directly for the damage costs? I asked. If your insurer pays out on your claim, they may subrogate, pursue recovery from the responsible parties on their own behalf. That's their decision and their process. You can also pursue a parallel civil claim for costs outside your policy. The two don't interfere with each other. What I'd recommend is documenting every single dollar. Contractor estimates, insurance adjuster notes, my fees, even your own time. He paused. You handled the immediate situation correctly. Now let's make sure the follow-through is airtight. I called Kurt in Scottsdale. He came out 2 days later and spent the better part of an hour with the drafting table, running his hands along the scratch, testing the adjustability of each leg, making notes in a small pad with the quiet focus of someone who built the thing and doesn't take damage to his work lightly. He found something I hadn't. The repositioning had put lateral stress on one of the adjustable leg supports in a way that was invisible, but would eventually compromise the table's stability if not corrected. His total repair estimate was $300, itemized on a formal invoice that I photographed and sent to both Mr. Yoon and my insurance adjuster the same afternoon. The next 2 weeks were quiet in appearance and loud underneath. My parents called 9 times across 4 days. My father left voicemails. My mother sent 2 texts that escalated from gentle to pointed. Gabby sent a long, unpunctuated message that reframed everything I had done as a deliberate campaign against her and described herself and Tanner as the real victims of a situation I had inflamed beyond reason. I read each message once and put my phone face down. I didn't respond to any of them. The opposing attorney, hired, apparently, within 48 hours of the police visit, opened with the position that Gabby hadn't meant any harm, that the key she'd retained had been given freely, and that I should consider withdrawing any claims is in the spirit of preserving family relationships. Mr. Yuan's reply was a single paragraph. My client's position is firm and her documentation is complete. We are prepared to file. The settlement terms we put forward were clear. $3,100 for the drafting table repair, $900 for floor restoration, $1,200 for professional cleaning and reconfiguration of the studio, $6,400 in attorney's fees, and $8,000 in additional damages for the unauthorized occupation, the distress of returning home from a work trip to find my property violated, and the disruption to my professional environment during the period the studio was compromised. Total, $19,600. Plus a formal no-contact agreement covering my home address and my place of business, with a stipulated financial penalty for any violation and written acknowledgement that the key was to be considered permanently revoked. They pushed back on the additional damages figure. Mr. Yoon sent a one-line response to their counteroffer. My client's position has not changed. Please advise by end of week whether your clients intend to proceed to filing, at which point the damages calculation will be revised upward to reflect additional legal costs. The agreement was signed 12 days after that. I stood in my studio with the documents in my hand on a cold December afternoon, the winter sun coming through the west window at the particular hard, clear angle that Phoenix light takes on in December, and I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't fully understood I was holding. Not happiness, exactly. Something more fundamental than that. The feeling of correctness, of the world having been briefly and significantly wrong and having been, by effort and clarity, set right. I brought Kurt back to repair the table. While he worked, I reorganized my entire sample library into a system that was genuinely better than what I'd had before. More intuitive, faster to navigate, with a labeling method I'd been meaning to implement for 2 years but had never made time for. I had the floor section, near the entrance, refinished to match the rest. I repainted the north wall, the deeper tone I'd been considering for months and had never committed to. I replaced the side entrance lock with a keypad model. No physical key, no spare copies, no ambiguity about who has access to my property. I installed cameras at both entrances, linked to my phone, with motion alerts set to notify me within seconds. The insurance company covered $1,800 of the smaller property claims, and I withdrew that portion of the direct claim once the settlement was finalized, in full consultation with Mr. Yoon. Every cent of the restoration beyond that came from Gabby and Tanner's signed agreement. That mattered to me, not for the arithmetic of it, but because real consequences had to come from the people who had caused the damage. Otherwise, it wasn't accountability. It was just displacement. When the studio was finished, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The table was smoother than it had ever been, the carpenter's refinishing better than the original surface. The sample library was organized and logical. The keypad blinked green when I entered the code. The monitors glowed at their calibrated color temperature. The room was mine, completely and verifiably, with documentation and a legal agreement to prove it. Monica came over and I opened the bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir I'd bought at the Portland airport on the way home from the summit, and we sat at the drafting table and didn't say very much. That was the right amount. In early March, I ran into my neighbor Phyllis at the farmer's market, 2 blocks from the house. She's in her late 60s, retired. The kind of person who notices things about a neighborhood with the accuracy and discretion of someone who has been paying attention for a long time and doesn't feel the need to announce it. She mentioned, without prying, that she'd seen Gabby drive by a few weeks earlier with the car packed very full, the kind of full that means you're moving rather than running an errand. She also mentioned that another neighbor, Teresa, had seen my parents' car parked in front of my house one evening in January. She'd noticed because of the raised voices, the kind that carry on a quiet street in winter, and then a car door slamming, and then nothing. I didn't want to say anything at the time, Phyllis said. I wasn't sure what was going on. I appreciate that, I told her. She studied me for a moment with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who has known you at a surface level for 3 years and actually sees you. You look well, she said. Better than you did for a few months there, if I'm honest. I told her I was, and I meant it without any qualification. I've thought since then about what the whole thing cost me. Not in numbers, which I can account for precisely on a spreadsheet, but in the other ways. 3 weeks of fractured sleep. Hours of documentation and phone calls and legal consultations I would rather have spent on work I love. And the final, permanent loss of whatever version of my family I had been maintaining in my head, the one where they were people who could be trusted with something I cared about. But here's what it didn't cost me: the house, the studio, the table, the work I do in that room every single day. There is a particular kind of pressure that descends when you hold a line, and the people around you want you to release it. It disguises itself as reasonableness, as love, as the suggestion that people who matter to you shouldn't have to face the consequences of what they do because caring about them means absorbing whatever they choose to take. I felt that pressure from every direction. From my mother's patient suggestion that I had overreacted. From my father's anger that I had involved police in a family matter. From Gabby's text that recast every action I had taken as a form of cruelty visited upon her. I didn't move. The line was real, the house was mine. The work I do was real, and it happened in that room, and no one had the right to walk into it and decide otherwise. That turned out to be everything I needed to know. I'm at my drafting table right now, sketching a built-in library concept for a client in Tempe. The afternoon light is doing what it does at this hour. Low and warm through the west window, spreading across the table's surface where Kurt's refinishing has left it cleaner than it ever was. My sample library is exactly where it should be. My monitors are calibrated. The keypad on the side entrance glows a steady green. I didn't reclaim something I'd lost. I protected something that was mine. And I did it without apology, without hesitation, and without waiting for anyone's permission to believe it was worth protecting. That's the part that mattered most.